There are some names in the pottery world that we who are fairly new around here think, oh yeah, of course, that person. Perhaps we've seen the name as an author on a book that we bought in a random Google or Amazon search when we first started. Or maybe their Instagram is so big our accountant cousin even knows who they are. But how did they get to being so well known? Did they always know that they wanted to do this? Are they one of those unicorn makers who knew from age 5 they wanted to grow up to be a potter and pursued that goal single-mindedly without fail to a certitude of success? Or did they come to it later in life? Was their path maybe a bit more windy, like mine and perhaps yours? Is the place they've carved out in the maker's world because of a certain step-by-step process they followed? Or was it a bit more luck and timing? Well, my friends, one of those names that pops into my head as more of a name on a book rather than an actual person themselves is John Britt. And on today's episode, you just might be surprised how he came to have his name on the cover of that book that's probably on your shelf right now. Let's dig in. Welcome to the Maker's Playbook, the podcast where we talk all about what it's really like to make a living from the things you make. I'm your host, Rebecca Ikis-Kara. Hey, John, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you. Glad to be here.
Thank you so much for making the time so quickly. I am amazed that we synced up our schedules so fast. So it's exciting.
It's perfect. If we get the opportunity, I like to do it because you never know.
Amen. Amen. When I think of your name, I put the caveat behind it as the glaze guy, basically. Like there's a book that comes straight into my mind's vision when I think of your name. But for people who don't know who I'm talking to right now, how would you introduce yourself?
John Britt. I'm a potter and a writer, educator. So I wrote a couple books on glazes, and then I have YouTube channels and taught pottery for a long time. So I've been at it for like 35 or more years. So that's basically it.
Did you know 35 years ago that you were going to have such a focus on the education aspect, or did that happen kind of accidentally?
When I started, I was working at the University of Dayton, so I had a job there, and then I got free classes. I took art, I took philosophy and photography as a major, and then I got the job, and then I could take whatever I wanted. So I took some pottery classes, although I had taken a bunch of art classes before, and then because I just liked it. And so then the next thing I knew, my friend and I, he worked there with me, University of Dayton in campus ministry, and he did pottery. And then I am good at reading magazines of how to do stuff and then doing it. So there was a thing in there on like how to build a raku kiln. I'm like, oh, let's do this. And so I set that all up, and then we started doing that. And before you know it, since there weren't many people doing that, then we ended up teaching a class in it. And then, or I did, put it this way, I did. And then we still did pottery too. But once you get to know all the people at the craft school, then hey, I'll teach you another class and I'll do this. And then before you know it, then you see if you're good at it or not, or if you like it. And then it just went from there. There was zero planning. Let me just tell you that. In most everything that I do, it just sort of kind of happens.
And just to reiterate the point, the job you had at the University of Dayton wasn't even associated with the arts or...
Well, I was assistant to the director of campus ministry. So I did whatever this guy wanted me to do. And he needed help. So I would grade tests for him because he taught a bunch of classes, but he was the priest there. So he also did all the church services, but then they would be in a large chapel. So they needed like banners and signs.
You were a personal assistant.
Yeah, exactly. And then I was just say, okay, I'll do that. And so then I would do that. And then he'd say, oh, you can do that. Why don't you do this? And then before I know it, I was sewing. See, 'cause when I grew up, I had 10 kids in my family. I was second oldest. So my mom taught everybody how to do stuff. I knew how to sew like crazy. So I would sew these banners like they'd be 25 feet long. You're so you're sewing these things. Anyway, they're all super primitive, and I was not very good, but it was better than nothing. So then that's how it happened. So it was somewhat art related, but it's sort of twisted that way in the same way that, the teaching did and everything else. Once you find your niche, you just find another spot in there.
Which I think is so fantastic because, for somebody just reading your bio on the internet, for example, you've been teaching and doing pottery for 35 years. It's an easy assumption to think, okay, you studied it, you knew you wanted to do this.
Yeah.
Head down into the races, if you will. But no, not until after graduation that you actually found pottery and then started down this whole trajectory.
Right. I did philosophy and religious study, and because I was interested in psychology, so then I got a master's in counseling, and then I'm like, I don't really want to counsel. I just didn't want to do that. Even though I could sit on the bus and people would come up and tell me their life story and we'd have a good thing, but I didn't really want to do it for a job. And so that's when I was like, okay, what am I going to do here? And then getting that job helped me because I liked the University of Dayton. That's where I went to school, and my dad taught there, and my family was all there. So it was just a good place to sort of see what I was going to end up doing.
Yep, that make like a comfort zone, if you will.
Exactly.
To be able to experiment.
Exactly.
Yeah. I'm laughing to myself, total tangent, but I had the opportunity to study with Sandy Lockwood for a couple of months, and she got her master's in, what was it? I think she just finished studying something along the same lines as far as psychology and whatnot. But this is already as she's been a wood firer for however many decades that she's been doing it. And I'm like, what is it about potters and philosophy and psychology that is
anthropology and sociology?
I mean, geology makes sense to me, but we're all looking for backup job security plan. I love it. Well, so what kind of as in-depth or as overarching as you want to go from taking those classes and then being interested with your friend, and how did that then twist from okay, we're kind of doing this stuff for fun to now this is my career and this is where we're going to go?
Oh, well, I mean, I wasn't never really a career thinking like everybody says, what do you want to see yourself in 5 years? And I'm like, I don't know. Let's look at tomorrow. And so my deal was that I really just took one pottery class to wheel throwing, and then the teacher let me do independent study. So that's all I really wanted was to use the studio since it was right there. And then I just got super interested in it. I would read all kinds of books about it, just trying different things. And I guess I always sort of had a job. And so I just did this on the side for fun. So I did that campus ministry job, or I would paint houses or fix houses up and then try to flip a house or something. So I was always doing something like that. And then what happened was the lady who was teaching the pottery class, I knew that she was going to quit because she had told me this in the summer. And so I go over there. Now, there was a new director of the department. And so he came in August. He didn't know anything. He just moved there. And so I was like, I'll go over there. And I said, hey, John Britt here. If you ever need a pottery teacher, just let me know. And unbeknownst to him, he was going to need a pottery teacher shortly. And so I don't know if it was she didn't quit. I didn't understand what was happening with her, but she didn't quit till the day of class. So she came in and quit. And that's like, you just don't do that. And anyway, that's what she did. I don't know what her situation was, but anyway,
keep the health care until that moment. I mean, you gotta wait.
She had like family problems, or she had kids. It could have been something with, who knows what. But anyway, all I know is he calls me up and he's like, yeah, how about coming over, and we're looking for a pottery. And I was like, he was trying to play all like real hard to get. So it was the best interview I ever had because, it was not that hard to.
They were desperate.
They needed a warm body right now. And I was right there. And so he hired me for that class. And then it went well. And so then they had 2 more classes. So I did 2 more. And then the next year I did 3 and like that. And then one year I was hired as lecturer. So I was there about 4 years, and lecturer is like full time. So that's when I quit my other job. And then it just kept going from there.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, this is, as far as career advice for anybody, it really is
No,
all in who you know. No, I
right.
mean,
Well,
it's
that's
always who you know.
yeah,
That's what
yeah,
it always is.
that's true. But it was like no planning or anything. And then I had a job. Then I got married, and my wife had a job. She worked at a TV station, and we moved to Texas. And I got a jobs there doing adjunct a bunch of places. But then, right when I was leaving there, that's when they started instituting all this. I was in the 90s. They all wanted their professors to have terminal degrees. That was like a line on their college, whatever. And they're like, you're going to have to, you can't just be grandfathered in here. You have to have a master's degree to teach. And so that's when I sort of got out of that, because I either would have to go back to school or do something else. Then I got another job and we moved. All kinds of things happened.
I love that you mentioned that, because that is quite literally the reason that I, for a long time with my experience of getting out of undergrad and becoming self-employed, very quickly interested in these professional kind of practices. What I teach online now
Yeah.
is what somebody should be teaching this at the college level, but I couldn't justify going back and going into thousands of dollars of debt
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
be an adjunct and teach one class. It didn't
Right.
make any sense.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's amazing. So as you were getting into teaching full time or even adjunct and moving, was your studio practice then kind of increasing to where you, like, did teaching provide a safety net for studio practice, or there was just,
Yeah. So my wife made a decent living, so I didn't really have to do anything in particular, but I, always wanted to keep busy and do stuff. I was doing pottery and I would do craft sales. And so that was part of it. And then I would teach. I guess I thought of it as kind of different aspects that fed each other. I remember one time I went in and I said, so I was teaching. I didn't really know all this stuff. So I would just learn as I go. So I remember the class was like, I had to teach them how to make pictures. And then it sort of dawned on me, like on, I don't know if it was Thursday and this was Saturday, I should probably make a picture here. And so
you never made a picture?
I never made a picture. So I made a picture, and I made a bunch of pictures. I would look at magazines and see stuff about pictures, because back then it wasn't all YouTubey and stuff. I just had to be like one step ahead of my students, who were all beginners anyway. They didn't need the greatest picture maker in the world. So then the next week would be plates. So I sort of learned in that regard. And then it was kind of weird, because then I had to teach a sculpture class. And so like, I'm going to try to make it some sculptures.
You go from wheel throwing to sculpture, because that's a totally same skill set.
Totally
Absolutely.
Or then we would do the raku. So that's kind of a firing sort of class. And so to me, it was all interesting and, stimulating, and it sort of fed my stuff. And then I would be constantly making stuff to be selling and getting income that way. And so it all just sort of fed on itself. And then I could easily take one avenue or another, instead of being, I've got to make 14 place settings or something. A lot of potters just make something, then they keep doing that for decades, whereas I would always be doing different stuff.
And with the freedom of having the different revenues as far as teaching and whatnot, you didn't necessarily have to worry about making that.
Right. Exactly.
There's the two different worlds as far as when you do find something that you can sell, if that's your only income,
right.
No wonder
your
making
customers want that, and they expect that. And so then you have to keep doing that. Yeah.
Yep. It's hard enough to figure out one thing that people do want in the first place. So
I remember this one lady. She was a young potter, and she just could barely make a cup. She'd make a cup, and then she could put the handle on, kind of. But she figured out this glaze combination. It was like, I can't think of the name of it now, but it was like a purple glaze with like a floating blue on top. And the way it just went together, it made these starry things. It was just spectacular. And so all of a sudden, this is her thing. This is, and everybody else has been doing pottery for 20 years and nothing ever caught on. And they're looking at, like, she'd go to the sale and sell everything in like the half hour. And everybody else was like so upset, because they had spent 10 years trying, and nothing ever caught on. And so it was a catch-22. Then she's stuck with that. Other people don't have that problem, but they don't have that, income.
The grass is always greener.
Yeah.
As an outsider looking in, I've always assumed there's this deep interest in glazing, just of your own interest, because obviously you've written so many books on it. Would you say that has been your focus after a certain point, or Is that just the outside perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is fit with my aptitude because I was in like science classes, and when I started college, my friends were all like engineers and geology, biology. So for 2 years, it was generalized science. I knew science and math and stuff. I could converse in that. So like the first pottery class, I looked at all my bisqueware and I'm like, what are the glazes? I look at these glazes. I'm like, oh my God, I got to get something else. These were terrible because they were, just all brown. So I went out and bought a glaze. It was called Chun Red. It was really nice. And it was actually a silicon carbide red, which I did not know at the time, but later found out. But then that caused me to have to try to figure out glazing because I didn't really have anybody teaching me all this stuff. I was sort of on my own. So then we had to do the raku glazes by ourselves too with the raku class. So I would just get books and read it. And then it was intriguing to me. Then I ended up taking a course with Bao Cushing in about 1993 or four, I think four. It was a summer class to learn about glazes, which is what I was interested in. That sort of started it off a little more formally. Then I could teach at the college, be a little more informed about what I was teaching. And then when I was an adjunct in Dallas, I talked the lady into letting me teach a Friday glaze class. That was my first glaze class. And then when I came to Penland, I was just helping people always with their workshops. So you're essentially like a workshop setter-upper person. And I had to know about glazes because they came from their studio to this studio and had to work there. So then I kind of worked in that regard. And so I had taken a class with a workshop in Dallas with Ian Curry. So he's a big famous glaze guy. It's pretty technical. So I looked at his book and I saw that the first half was, to me, unreadable. And then the second half was good. The first part was like development of all this. And the second part was like practical. So I saw, okay, how to do blue celadon. And they have all these things in there. And then how to do, and I thought, well, we need a book like kind of in the middle. Because most potters, they're generally artists. And they have to figure out all this. So to me, it was like they weren't like geared towards, and I really wasn't geared that much to being an industrial chemist. I just wanted to get a blue and a green. And why does this happen? And how can we make more of that? And so that's why I thought of my book is like a combination of Ian Curry. So there's some technical, but then some practical. And then I figured you needed to organize it by color. You don't want to read through the whole thing to find out how to make a yellow. You'd say, okay, let's go right there. And then I guess when I started doing that, then it sort of breaks everything down. What kind of yellows are there? Like barium yellow or magnesium and iron. So once you then start breaking it down, then it makes the whole glaze world sort of open up and you start to see all this stuff.
The way that you just described as far as setting it up by the color makes me think of like a cookbook. I don't buy a cookbook trying to find the reason you use a cast iron skillet. I buy a cookbook to open up to a recipe for how to make, I don't know. I do none of the cooking in my house.
So I want to make pecan rolls. So I would like to look in pecan rolls. But then I like to also know that there's croissants, and there's peasant bread, and then there's nutty bread, and then and then pizza dough. And then I would like to actually know, because there was that guy, Alton Brown, I think he was a cook that had shows like that. And then you kind of also want to know what the underlying principles are to all those breads. So then you can start to make linkages. And I think that's what I wanted in glazing too, is to have these recipes, but also have some underlying principles that then would open up new avenues in your thinking.
And it's almost like, to me, from an education standpoint, recognizing that the people looking for this information didn't know the questions to be asking. Like they didn't know, if you're trying to make pecan rolls, you don't know that you need to know the underlying structure of bread, but the professional knows. And so now in today's world, you're not Google searching breadcrumb structure.
Right.
Which I can only say that phrase because the Great British Bake Off. But you're Googling pecan roll recipe.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Nobody in the US knows what proving is. I'm like, what is a
I know.
proving drawer? We don't have this. But anyway, I completely digress. We've
I know.
taken the metaphor way too far.
No, but it is true that way. This is the problem. Like people come to me for glaze class, they need to understand some stuff so that when somebody asks them, like, "Oh, why is this crawling?" Because there's so many reasons. In order to know, you have to have a lot of information to know all the possibilities. Otherwise, you just give like stock answers, and then you feel like you really don't know what you're talking about. So that's why they come, as like to sort of open things up a little, and then we get a broader view, and then that will help us get the tighter views too.
Yeah, absolutely. So when was that first book? Remind me of the year.
Oh, that was in 2004. I was working at Penland, and what happened was it's about an hour from Asheville, and Lark Books was in Asheville. And so they were doing craft books. And I was pretty interested in all this stuff. And so I would be in contact with, and they might call me up and ask me if there was some books I thought should be written or something. I guess just because I worked at Penland, because they had a relationship with Penland. But then Mark Burleson came out with a book, and it had some mistakes in it. So I tried to tell him that there was these mistakes in there. And then when that came to be true, a long story, I don't have to get into all that, but I was telling the lady, Suzanne Tortilla was her name. She was the editor there. She would call me and then, talk to her. My wife's sitting there listening, she's like, "Hey, do you know they want you to write a book?" And I was like, "What?" And then and so then I said,
This is your wife?
That's my wife. It's like, hey, dummy. She's not just talking to you. She's like, and so whether that was true or not, then I made a proposal, and then I went in there, and that's when I told them I told them one chapter. It was a copper red. So I showed them, I like these charts. Like that was a Val Cushing way to make charts of glazes, but I figured you could get a lot of glazes. I wanted a lot of recipes. And so I think there was 400 in that book. And so I made these charts, and then I did the sections of oxblood, flambe, etc. And then I went in and did the proposal. I thought it was just going to be me and Suzanne in there, but it was like the president and then 3 other people. And I was like, then I got nervous. I was like, oh my God. But anyway, they liked it. And so then I was still working at Penland. And so I would work at night, and I would get up in the morning at like 5 o'clock, because it's my house about a half hour from Penland. So I would drive there, and I would get there about 6, and I would work until like 7:30 and then we had breakfast there. So 7:30 or 8. And then, so I would always get 2 hours of making tests and doing stuff. Then I could be firing it in the day, or sometime collect them all. And I could just like work on a chapter. And then I just kept doing that for about a year and a half. And then towards the end of that, I quit so I could finish the book. I had about a month to turn it in. That's like the beginning of the process. So that's how it was. 2004. I just kept doing pottery because I wasn't working at Penland then. We lived around there. And so I just kept doing more pottery and doing workshops and stuff like that.
Just to backtrack a little bit, You guys went from Dallas to when you got the job at Penland, or because that's a pretty big jump to go from an adjunct professor who's learning how to do the thing the day before he's teaching it to working at Penland.
Okay. Well, my wife had a big job. She was the president and CEO of the Dallas public TV. So there's 2 TVs and a radio station. And so she had quit her job before, just in commercial, and wanted to try public TV, see if it was a better fit for. And so we went to Dallas, and then she was done with TV. So she quit, and she said, well, we can go anywhere you want since I tortured you to bring you. Now, anyway, Dallas was difficult. It was difficult because it was like so many million people, and it's 100 degrees all the time. So anyway,
it's like another country for people who don't.
Well,
live
exactly.
in the US.
If you don't know that, you need a passport to get in there, and of course, they don't believe if you're not from there, you're not from there. So, anyway, although we met tons of good people, it was a really great place. Well, it was super good for me because I lived in the center of town, and I could go to all these schools were a half hour outside on a ring. It was a community colleges. One did wood firing. One did a cone 6. One did, I don't know, more sculptural. One did, so everybody had like focus. And so I could learn so much from all these. And see, I didn't really have a I had a studio, but I didn't have kilns and all that stuff. So then I would always use their stuff.
What month, I'm going to digress.
Yeah.
What month of the year do you possibly wood fire in Dallas?
Oh,
Because
God,
my
yeah.
God, the temperature.
No, it was brutal. One time we fired in August. Oh my God,
Oh,
brutal. It was brutal. Anyway,
that's
but
a terrible idea.
but we were just all enthusiastic about stuff. So anyway, so where was I going with this?
Sorry, the transition from Dallas to Penland,
Oh yeah.
basically.
So then she said, you can go anywhere you want. So I just applied places, and then they needed somebody. And that was sort of fortuitous too, because that was in, I think, like June. And of course, they have all the classes are from like May till August or something. And so this was like they were looking for somebody like in the middle of the summer, which is like, once again, a problem for them. And so I came and I'm, scouting it out. I said, I better go because we were going to interview by phone. And I thought, I think we better go out there. But we were in a travel trailer in Colorado. We thought, okay, so we drove there and we're like, wow, this is the middle of nowhere. It's like in the woods, really deep. And so then I did the interview and I think they needed somebody and they called me in and they wanted me to come like sooner. And I was like, I'm not sure if I can do that. But that's when I realized they needed somebody. So that's sort of how that happened. I mean, it's an organizational type job. You're talking to the instructor, getting their stuff, then dealing with the students and cleaning up and keeping everything rolling. So it wasn't like I needed to be, a glaze person or anything. But that's just how I ended up there. And I think I was pretty old. So I was like 40 years old when I took that job, which most of them were, younger because
Out of college.
you needed energy and it wears you out because there's like 20 people in the upstairs studio and 20 people in the lower studio. So you got like 35 or 40 people and they're gung-ho for 2 weeks. And then you have to clean up and get ready for the next one. And then it's like, okay, here's 40 more people. They're gung-ho. And so you have to really pace yourself. But either way, you're exhausted at the end of the summer. But yeah, that's how I ended up there. And then once I quit the job, we thought, where should we stay? Where else do we want to go? We thought, well, this is pretty nice here. So, and I think that's how a lot of potters or artists end up around Penland because they come and it's so nice. And then they thought, well, we'll just settle down here. So that's kind of how that happened.
It's fascinating and hilarious to me because when somebody just reads the bio on the internet, it's like, oh yeah, John Britt's a potter. Of course he lives in North Carolina. Like there's about 3 places in the United States potters live. And that's one of them. But in reality, it's not so obvious in the trajectory of how you guys wound up there, which
there's no master plan. I guess that's the way things are a lot. Like if something comes up and you're ready and available, then there you go. You're good to go. So it was no sitting down and doing a longitudinal study of my strengths and weaknesses and where I need to go. This is just, and then we thought we were only going to stay there. I said to her, see, they provided housing. So it was a really little shack called Blue Haze, but it was right on this road they called hardly a road. And then at the end of the road was barely a house. So that sort of tells you it was a traditional North Carolina, like a shack from the 30s. It's not a modern house. It gets kind of moldy and old. Like the house would shake when you would walk in. And I said to my wife, let's just pretend like we're camping there. We'll try it for a year. And then we thought, okay.
It's a long time to camp.
Well, exactly. That's how we sort of just did it as a temporary thing. And then you just sort of fit in and see how things work. And go from there.
I just want to reiterate the point because it's so entertaining to me that you went from your wife being a president of a television company to living in a barely house.
Yeah.
Just to make sure nobody missed that part.
It was a transition, especially for her, because we had a nice house in Dallas and it's a big city. You can go eat out, really. It's great places. So now we're in the middle of the woods. She's very flexible and resilient. And it was a good time for her to relax and unwind. And so that it all sort of worked pretty well. But it was a big change. The biggest change was when she had a office, it had like 5 TVs all going simultaneously to look for breaking news and all this stuff. That was in Dayton. And so then when we moved to the similar in Dallas, not quite the same, but because they didn't have like breaking news and stuff, but you still are looking at the whole industry and you're seeing what's happening every day. You're in touch with what's happening. And so we move out there into the woods, and they kind of didn't like you even in those days having a newspaper, because that was like the outside world intruding on your sort of like art as a sort of a reclusive, self-reflective type activity. And so we came and we're like, oh, we need to get TV here. We need to get like satellite. So we called up the satellite, and they're putting in a dish, right? But we're right on the main road as you pull in. And the maintenance guy's like, oh, wait a minute, what's going on here?
Everybody can see it.
You can't put that there. And so we couldn't put it there. So when we moved to this other little shack, because that was just our temporary house, then we could only point it up the mountain, because the mountain was in the way for satellite. So now we were in the like holler there. And so we had to point it up, and we would only get TV light. When the leaves came in, then the TV went away. And so in the summer, it was super sketchy. But as soon as the fall came, we'd have like full on TV. And then everybody from around there was like, oh, we don't like TV. We don't watch TV. And we're like, okay. And so then there would be that show, West Wing was on. And then we'd get a knock on the door. Oh, can we watch your cable? And we're like, we won't tell anyone. And the NCAA, that's the time right now, is NCAA tournament. Oh my God, we'd have like 30 people over there. We were reverting back to the 50s, sharing the TV.
It was like you had a drug or something.
Don't tell anyone. No, it was fun. It was fun. We had a good time.
When you're thinking about how you've made this work over the years, do you feel like, in terms of, there's so many people now who are either coming to clay and ceramic specifically, or just making in general, whatever the craft may be, that are like, I love this. I want to do this. How can I do it?
Yeah.
Is there something you feel like you've done over this trajectory that's made it work?
Yeah. Well, okay. So for me, my wife calls it multiple streams of income. I call it having 2 jobs, 3 jobs, and so diversify is another way to do it. But I think, as I've noticed, potters all the while do that. They don't really talk about it, but I know people who do crafts fairs and make pottery, but they also may teach a class here and there, or they may have one in their, like they may be a wood fire, or they may have a wood firing twice a year at their studio, and then people come so they can make extra money that way, or they may do kiln building. Maybe they're also good, because now potters have to be good with the making web pages. So this was maybe back 10 years ago, before all, everything is constantly changing. So it's just multiple streams of income. So in my case, it's making pottery and selling it. And now you can sell Etsy by yourself or whatever, have your own like kiln openings. But then I did the book. And so the book is like, I get some money every year for the residuals from the book. And then I'm teaching, then the book makes these classes possible. So people know my name. So now I can do more classes, and that YouTube channel. So that sort of feeds the whole thing. And then you get a little money from that. And then, so part of the teaching, since I couldn't really teach in the middle of nowhere, it's an hour drive to any colleges, and there's a lot of people applying for those jobs. So I thought, well, I'll just do some of these how-to videos. So I did how to throw, how to just stuff I would do in teaching, but then I'm selling DVDs, and then I can sell them as electronic things. And so then that's another stream. And then I don't know what else, but that's how I always did. Like I was saying before, I, had a job, a regular job, make insurance and all that stuff. And then I would have teaching on the side, or I would do fixing up houses, or I would, all different, did fast food. I did everything that everybody else does. But I think sometimes people want to just become a potter, and that's it. And that's like super difficult. Unless you get lucky like that girl who found that super good glaze combination, and then all of a sudden now you're on you're on Instagram, and you're getting your follow. You can sell you just put your pots up there and sell them like crazy. So that's pretty rare. But normally it's a slow, incremental maybe call building your brand or whatever we're calling these things. Now, before it's just like surviving, But people think I'm just going to now officially be a potter. But really, I think it's a whole, and you have to constantly adapt. So, like, okay, all of a sudden there's a pandemic. Oh, huh. Who would have thought that? Now, let's see if we can get 35 old people in a room to talk about glazes. No. So as soon as that day hit, March 10th, whatever it was, 2020, I had no more classes. So thankfully I had diversified my income because I'm not like, I can't just like quit working. So now I've gotten a job with the architectural tile company. So I do glaze testing for these people. And since I had 2 years of no workshops, and so, because we would try to do them, but then all of a sudden there'd be, something else would come up, or it would be in Canada. They won't let Americans in, or, all this stuff happened. So that job was fantastic. That guy found me from Instagram. And so it's like, okay, all this stuff just sort of happens accidentally. And then now I'm getting ready to go back. I'll probably do another workshop next week. And then I'll probably get workshops going again. We'll see. If I decide I don't like that, I can stop doing that and just do this other thing. But yeah, I think you have to be really flexible and have a group of things that keep you going. That's my opinion.
The interesting thing for me, as somebody who has tried to diversify income previously for photography and realized that I got stretched so thin.
Yeah.
My students have heard me use this metaphor before, where it's like, if you're trying to push a boulder up a hill, you can put enough weight and enough inertia behind it to get it going, and then you can keep going. And that's if you're focusing on one thing.
Yeah.
Whereas if somebody at the top of the hill pours a bucket of pebbles at you, and you're trying to keep all of these pebbles up, and people can't see me flailing my arms on the video here. When there's so many things to keep track of, you actually don't get any traction at all. Yeah. So how are you managing all of these disparate things?
This is a difficult question. I don't know, but you have gone back to my philosophy study, the myth of the Sisyphus, who pushed the rock up the hill and then it would fall back down the next day up again. So it almost does feel like that. I don't know that answer. I just somehow managed to do my thing. I didn't know that I would turn into a glazed person. I mean, I had no idea. It's just like, I thought, okay, everything revolves around how do you make a living as a potter? That's my overriding thing. So I'm like, how is this possible? Because I was working for very low money at Penland. I was 40 years old. I'm making no money. It's like, oh my God. And then, so I'm saying, okay, well, maybe I'll do some workshops, or maybe and I didn't have my name out there, so that's very difficult. Well, maybe I'll write a book about pottery. And so then that's how that idea came about. And then all the other ones are like, okay, how am I going to have a reasonable living in the woods? See, you can't just show up and have a job. You have to figure all this out.
You're not going to have a retail store. There's no foot traffic.
No, exactly. And then when you're going to do craft fairs, that involves a lot of traveling. And so you have to decide if you like that. So all this stuff I don't have an answer for it, but you just have to eventually withstand the onslaught of all the pebbles coming down, and then find a couple that might work, and then go for that and see what happens. And then you want to be happy. The whole idea is you want to have a happy, fulfilling life. And so somehow you have to find that answer. I don't know for everybody. I just know my own.
Did the book get traction right away, or has that just kind of been a slow burn, if you will?
I was pretty good in the beginning, but it's really not. I mean, there was a need
not as
for
fancy as it seems like.
It wasn't like magic, And potters, in case you don't know, they're like super slow at adopting. I remember one guy comes up to me. I think it was like 2008 or something. So my book had come out in hardcover, and then after a while, when it doesn't sell as well, they put it in paperback, and that's the way they generate. And then they just usually just stop publishing it.
Then goes out an ebook.
Yeah. Anyway, so he says, oh, you got a new book. And I'm like, yeah, that was like 6 years ago, and that's how long it takes potters to look. They're all working in their studios and they're not paying attention. They're trying to focus and do their thing. So, you got a book. And so it took quite a while for things to get rolling. And so maybe around that 2007, I started doing more workshops. And then since that went well, people liked them, then I had more and more. And so then I knew that the Cone 6 book would be the best because that's the largest group of potters out there. And so we tried to do it by ourselves, my wife and I, but then we decided we'd either have a book and get divorced or so we decided maybe we'll just get, and then the guy asked
publisher.
if I would, and it's very difficult. And everybody has different ideas about everything. And so this worked out better because he just asked me if I would do another book. And so then that's how that happened. The mid-range book. And that was around 2012 or something. It came out, I think, in 2014. So it takes you a couple years to do it. But yeah.
I love that you said that it's not magic because I think the hard thing about the internet now and Instagram is you see people out there having so much success and you don't see all the things they tried beforehand that didn't get any traction or the things that, like even for me, having been self-employed for 11 years and then having this idea because of COVID for the podcast and for teaching photography, I'm getting traction with that because I learned for the past 11 years all the things that I messed up before.
Right. So the illusion of the modern thing is the whole instantaneous. So you're on, and you're going viral and selling all your pots or something, but probably things will slow down. So you'll have to have ebb and flow too. So I think you just expect immediate results, whereas the reality of things is it's a slow and steady. What's the tortoise and the hare deal? I think that's what it is for most people. But what we see is the people who just take off and then, why can't I have that?
Yeah. I was chatting with Kurt Hammerly about what it takes because his whole business is built off Instagram, more or less, as far as where he's selling his pots. And the acknowledgement that half of his time, half of his working hours is just on Instagram. He's spending 20 hours a week or something to make that work on Instagram.
Exactly.
Is a lot of time, which works for him, but for other people, they might not be willing to sacrifice that much time outside of the studio or wherever else to have that type of business model.
Right. And I kind of know that because I'm doing these workshops. So these workshops don't just magically happen, When COVID hit, all of a sudden I had so much time. I was like, oh my God. And that's why I did all these PDFs, because then I had concentrated effort, which was, fantastic. But you realize that you have to be posting and communicating and thinking of a new one, doing another video. But when am I going to put this out? I had to keep up with all my website and all my Instagram and Facebook and Tumblr back then. And now it's Twitter. I haven't even managed to get onto what's the new TikTok because it's like, oh my God, I can't do it.
If you get on TikTok and start a dance trend, I'm going to need to know. I will get on TikTok with you.
It'd have to be something to do with like mud and fire. And if I did something I think I could do it. I think I could get some hits.
That could be a thing. I could see that. I could see that going viral, and then I will have to get a TikTok.
Exactly.
But I think the other hard piece of it too is, okay, you've got to try out these things.
Yeah.
But you also have to try them out for long enough.
Yeah.
And know when to, we're all trying different things out, but then you don't want to let yourself get spread too thin. So what I kind of see as an outsider looking in, what I see with what you were doing is all of your efforts were still focused on what you wanted to do no matter what. And it's just that the medium changed in how you were sharing that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I knew back when I started, I don't know if I mentioned that, I did cable access TV. So back when I quit at the university, I got a grant. So I applied for a grant, got this county-wide grant in Montgomery County, which was excellent. And then I used that money to do this cable access video, a series of videos on pottery. But what you had to do back then was you had to learn how to use they had big cameras and a whole setup. So it wasn't just like
Mhm.
a phone. And so I made all these videos, Dysfunctional Pottery, John Britt's Dysfunctional Pottery. I made like 25 videos, which ran endlessly at night in
Yeah,
Dayton.
the middle of the night.
But anyway, that was sort of the start. So I knew if I could get out there with this, I wanted to be on public TV, but they weren't going for it. And too much production costs and stuff. So I thought, well, I'll just do it myself. That's all. That's how I ended up doing everything. I'll just do it myself. And so that's what I did. But see, like you were saying, there's a background to your photography and weddings and stuff. And so this is the background to me ended up doing these videos. Actually, I had my wife doing my camera work she didn't want her name associated with my videos though, because they're so primitive.
Don't paint my TV record.
Exactly. She actually has an Emmy, so she doesn't want to like touch me. so I wanted to do mine like all sort of normal. I didn't want to do a ton of editing because then that's more and more work. So I said, I'm going to do all of these live. There is no editing at all. And so that's what I liked about the ones I have on YouTube. And even the ones where I hired this guy to do my videos for my DVDs, but they're like minimal editing, just cutting in clothes. And so to me, that's more natural and spontaneous and it's the way, like if you cough or you sneeze or something, yeah, okay. People cough and people sneeze. And so it's okay. And then I just wanted to convey information because to me, I was always searching for information. I know you can't believe that now, like what you can just Google anything. But back in the day, it was like, if you found a pottery book, it was like, oh my God, look at this thing. This was from England. Oh my God. It was like, so this is what we were always searching for was information. And with potters, they don't really want to share because they work so hard. It's like that girl is not going to tell you what that purple glaze is and what that other glaze on top of it is because she figured that out and she's not going to just say, here it is. So what to me was always like trying to figure this out, trying to freely communicate with potters information and for free. That's my main thing because I didn't have any money. When I first started out in pottery, there was a book, I think it's called The Potter's Art might be Garth Clark. I think it's Garth Clark. This is like way back. This is like in the 80s or 90s. Anyway, it's like a history of pottery. It's called The Potter's Art. In this book, they go through and they tell about this guy. I forgot his name right now, but they had figured out copper reds in America in like the late 1800s, 1900s. It was like fantastic. But then I guess what happened was they didn't want to share with anybody. And so the dad went crazy or something. And then the son burnt all the recipes and all the stuff. And I thought to myself, now that was a damn shame because I'm trying to figure this out now. It's 1986, so it'd be nice to have gotten that information. So then I decided if I was always going to talk about pottery and tell people stuff instead of, because what they mainly do is just not tell. And so I said, I'm going to do the opposite. I don't know if you're old enough to watch this Seinfeld show. It was called Do the Opposite. It was a George Costanza. He said, I'm a 35-year-old man living at home with my parents. I'm not married. I don't have a job. Evidently, all of the choices I've made up to this point have led me here, and they've all been wrong. So it follows if I do the opposite, I will be successful. And so, he did everything. So I thought it was just a funny thing. And I thought sometimes that is a good way to just do something not the way everybody else is doing it. Mm-hmm. Anyway, that was my whole deal about sharing pottery information.
Yeah. It's funny because I think a lot of the conversation I hear now is it's this constant pendulum swing, right? Because you came to that because no one was sharing. And now there's a conversation online where people are expected to be sharing and can't make a living. Right. And so they're trying to figure out, hey, I want to share, but at the same time, I'm putting forth all this free labor.
Right.
And as a potter, your time is the most important thing. And so then how do you balance? It's like we got to keep swinging the pendulum back and forth until we get in the middle.
I know it's very difficult because the first thing, if you put something on Facebook or something, they're like, what's that recipe? And that's the first thing they want. And unbeknownst to them, it'd be like me telling you how to make brioche. Like I say, here's the recipe. And you still got to know stuff. You still got to have equipment. You still have to have an oven. You still have to know how to work your, you know what I mean? All these things are involved. So if I just give you this recipe, because like say for instance, I have some PDF, gold Shino. Well, people say, what's that recipe? I mean, I can give you the recipe. The problem is it's 53 pages. You know, and I cannot convey that information in a Facebook little, shaded square. I think they don't quite understand that. And I understand the frustration of, like, say, Hammerly or stuff. I see him on there and they'll ask him always what his recipe. And he's out because he got one. I think there was one he used from the first book. It's like the purple one, really nice glaze, but he does a fantastic job of it. But I'm sure they just ask him all the time, what's the recipe? And so I'm sure that becomes irritating because you're not just that's recipe. He's like got a whole system of a way he's making stuff, selling it,
The way
talking
it's
about it.
applied, how thick it is, if he's changed
Exactly.
it versus the recipe.
Right. And so I understand it. And I don't know, the answer to that. I don't know. You just say, look in that book over there. Good luck.
Go buy John Britt's book.
Exactly. I don't know. It is a dilemma, especially now because not just one person's asking you, but there's hundreds. So I think people don't understand. Like when I'm on there doing stuff, I'll get 3 or 4 people a day asking me stuff just privately, and then not to mention online. And so you have to figure out a way to balance that, or you're constantly working all the time.
Right. And that's the thing. I think so many of us want to share and support the community, but there has to be kind of a sustainable way to do it too, in terms of.
Yeah.
And I guess the other thought that just passed into my head that's going to take us on a totally different trajectory, there is a little bit of a difference between, I feel like when you pay for something, you're a little more committed to it, right? If
Right.
you, at the beginning of the year, New Year's resolution, you're going to get in shape. If you go get the $10 gym membership, odds are you're not going to the gym.
Yeah.
But if you get the obscene, like $300 gym membership,
buy
you're
the
going to show up.
$2,500 Peloton thing.
Yeah.
Now you're like, you're in, or you're going to look stupid if you don't start using that thing.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's why everybody's so obsessed, because it's like, I better use it or else. I love it. I love it. That's a great
No, it
thing.
is. I do think that sometimes, if people make a commitment to something through money, but it's a, double-edged sword. It's hard to say. Like, I want to support people who don't really have they didn't go to school like I did. So they have no teachers so if you go to college and you get a master's in ceramics, now you've got a network of people that are essentially like behind you. So this is assisting you a lot. So I like to help people who are just like some normal person who likes pottery and is trying to do it. And they're not horrible they're, just normal people. They're not really obnoxious. And so I try to help these people because generally good people. Occasionally you get some people in there who are a little rough, but that's just the way it goes. So I try to cater to the 95% of people are good and just give them a little hand. So maybe I can do it for other people. And so they don't all have to share. Just say, go ask this guy.
We're just going to start at John Britt. Go.
Well, I'll tell you what, because this lady started, Joanne is her name. She's from New Zealand, and she started the Facebook group, Exploring Mid-Range Glazes Together with John Britt's book, because I did not make that title up. That was hers. The whole thing was her idea. But then this is a great group because she's a very nice lady. And so the overriding theme of this group is being nice. And so if anybody is like getting snotty, but I mean, next thing you know, you're going to be blocked. And so she doesn't mess around. But what has eventuated from that is this group is like super nice. There's 15,000 people on there, and you can go on there and ask these questions, and I can answer, or I can just let these people. Everybody is so knowledgeable now; it's mind-boggling. And so there'll be 100 answers to your question, what glaze does Kurt Hammerly use? Or I don't know, something like that. Yeah. But they're just so nice. And so when I become exhausted from helping all this, then I can just let them do it. And then it's a sort of self-generating kind of thing.
That's fantastic. Well, I know I'm using up a lot of your time here. So just to give people a little insight, what is kind of your average week? What's life look like right now as far as how you're making all this work?
Okay, I just like so right now, and of course everything changes. So we're coming out of the pandemic. So I do my work for this company. I do tests for them a lot of times in the morning, and then I will fire the kiln. And that way, so I like to do that because the next day I can look at it. And I have a small test kiln, so I can do another one. And then you get a lot of ideas and you can sort of play off of them. And so I'll do that. And then I sell books. And so I go to my orders, do my orders. Then I may eat some lunch.
On a good day, yeah.
On a good day, take a walk. We'll walk with the dog. We try to walk for an hour or something a day. And then I do my meditation, maybe do that. And then I maybe either make some things or clean up. Like this week I cleaned up like crazy. So it's just, and then I'm going to be building a kiln. So I'm sort of thinking about I got this workshop coming up, and then I got a couple in the works. And so I may call those people on the phone, and then I may think about my kiln building. So it's always, it's a variety. That's been quite good for me because now I'm 63. And so a lot of people I know who do pottery they got bad elbows or bad shoulder or back because they did production pottery for 40 years, So I'm kind of lucky because I didn't really do that much I did enough to keep in the game, but not too much to really debilitate myself. And so that's it. That would pretty much be a day.
Amazing. Is there anything you feel like, there's a million things we haven't talked about, but anything, if there was a place for you to be able to tell people something about making this work as long as a career and as long as you have that the next time you get 100 questions of the same question, you can just send them this link.
Well, that's what I always say in my YouTube, like make 1,000 of those and call me tomorrow, because if you really want to do pottery, you have to do a lot of it. And then the questions end up going away because you understand it. And it's probably the same about career stuff. I think people get so, like I have someone I know, they want to be like the star of music, like Justin Bieber. I'm like, you're 20 years old, give it a little bit of time. Like I didn't even write the book till I was 40. You have to be a little patient that's like the thing I think is, I don't know. It's not going to happen overnight. You don't have to become famous or well-known or something. You just have to try to figure out a way to make your life the way you want it to be. So, I don't really know I got no answers, right? I just keep doing what I love. See, that's what it is. I love doing this. And so tomorrow I wake up, oh, I'm so curious. I'm like, what's that? Like, I tell you what, that's the worst thing I had to get over. Like you're watching on Instagram, I see all these great things. There's no way you can do all those. But I would look at them and say, oh my God, how do they do that? So I try to figure it out. But at some point you're going to have to let go because there's too many things. It's just mind boggling. Anyway.
Well, I know what I'm about to say. I feel like it's going to take us down a whole different trajectory. And I've used the time that I said that we would stop at.
That's okay, yeah.
But it's the conversation Francesco and I have had as far as me being a hobbyist potter and him having the production professional experience is the hobbyist mind. I see something on Instagram and I want to go and try it. And then I try it and then I see the next thing and I want to go and try that. And you don't spend enough time. Whereas from his perspective, from a professional standpoint, you got to spend enough time with something to really understand the whole process, whether that just be how to throw something and the process from start to finish, or ceramics as a whole, the process, or whatever it is. But as we keep jumping from one thing to the next thing, you don't make any headway, any meaningful movement on it. Right.
It's a dilemma. See, I always say like the hobby potters have the best and the worst of the world, because the best is you're not stuck in the drudgery of the everyday doing the same thing over and over. It really becomes work, But you can try all these things, but then what happens is that, if you okay, all this, so let's if you did baking, like you're a pie maker today. Okay. Oh, I like cakes. Let me go make, oh, cupcakes. Look at those cupcakes. Oh, they're miniature cupcakes. Let me make some of those. Oh, let's go. And before you know, it's like you can't do any of those things really well. And then people will want the secret. That's what the recipe is about. They want the secret. But the secret is like what your husband is saying, like, let's just do this and stick with and dig in. And then we're gonna go from there versus everything. Every time you swipe your finger across the phone, like there is 1,000 new ideas. It's like, oh, that's one thing happened to me when I was up at Penn. They would do what they call artist talks, slideshows at night. And you'd have 4 or 5 people because it was a whole school. So there would be blacksmiths and weavers and photographers and everything. And so you would go up to these slideshows, and after an hour, you would have all these ideas. Then you'd have to go back to work. And then the next day, you would go to another slideshow. You'd have all these ideas. And I like to actuate my idea. If I have an idea, I like to get on it and do it. And then I'd be so frustrated. Like I literally had to stop going because it was causing me like mental torment. So that's the thing you have to figure out. And maybe all this Instagram-y stuff, you're going to have to figure out your own thing to, not you, but just in general. Like maybe I'm not watching that for a while. I'm like going to do this and then come back, but it'll still be there when you come back. I guarantee you, in full force.
Yes. Yes. Or there'll be 3 other platforms you can dive, or John Britt will be dancing on TikTok. I mean, what are the options?
With fire. Yeah.
We've got a plan for that account. Like, all right, this episode's going live on what date?
I'll try to get it together by then. You have to take some lessons.
Oh, gosh. I love it. John, thank you so much for your time.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for asking me. I appreciate it.
I so appreciate it. Absolutely. Where is the best place of all of these myriad of places on the internet? Where do you want to send people to come find you, the book, whatever?
Oh, you can just Google me and you'll find a million, but I'm on johnbrittpottery.com, but there I got the YouTube channel is pretty good. It's, YouTube at John Britt Pottery, but it's all John Britt Pottery. So you just Google and you'll be like, I laugh because my brother, when you Google his name, nothing comes up. He's like scrubbed it. I think he paid some of it. But when you put mine up, it's like, oh my God. He's like, aren't you worried about your internet presence? I said, it's too late, man. It's too late.
He must not be self-employed. For somebody who's not self-employed, they're worried about having an internet presence, whereas we are worried about not having enough of an internet presence.
Exactly.
I love it. Awesome. Thank you so much.
All right. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And that wraps up episode 306 here on the Maker's Playbook podcast. And I, for one, am immensely encouraged by John's story, particularly to realize that the thing so many of us know him for, glazing books, is actually pretty relatively new when you look at the years of his career. In other words, you are not behind, my friend. I am not behind, despite what perhaps social media makes us feel like. If you're looking for a gentle, realistic reminder that you're not behind and a supportive place where we are all trying to battle this crazy life of creating what we love and also supporting ourselves, whether as side hustlers or full-time makers, come check out if the community might be the right online home for you. The community was built knowing just how lonely this audacious dream of making a living from the things we make when we're all just scrolling Instagram and seeing everyone else's highlight reel rather than their real life can feel. Inside the community, we have makers from all over the world, some of who have been making a living from the things they make for decades, some of whom are just getting started, mini side hustlers, and everything in between. We are coming together to provide a safe and supportive environment to help each other think strategically about how to keep up with this quickly changing world, while at the same time, not burning ourselves out. And the bonus perk of all of that? By joining, you're helping support the creation of this very podcast. Come check out more details at makersplaybook.com/community. If you're listening to this with your hands covered in mud, there will be a link in the show notes that you can see on whatever podcast app you're listening to us from. So simply click there once you've wiped your hands off. Again, that's makersplaybook.com/community. All right, my friends, until next week, go get back to making your dreams a reality, because together we've got this.